Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I kind of want to give a little bit of a channel update and how it kind of correlates with the SAG-AFTRA and the WGA strike. And also kind of just talk about my thoughts about those in general too, because when it comes to the strikes, I've talked a little bit about the WGA in some of my reviews, not a lot, but I don't think I've really talked too much since, you know, SAG joined as well. So we'll kind of talk about that, but kind of giving you some updates first and foremost in relation to all of this. First and foremost, I am not going to be doing any new watch list videos for the foreseeable future during the duration of this strike. So if you're unaware what the watch lists are, basically it's like a video I do monthly where I, you know, at the beginning of the month or maybe at the end of the previous month, just depending on like what date stuff falls on, I will basically do like a TV guide to be like, yo, these are the things that are coming out TV show wise that I'm interested in, that maybe you're interested in too, that are coming out. And so the reason why I'm pulling back on doing those is because obviously there's a whole conversation about like promoting struck material and companies that are being striked against. So that's where, like, because what is my watch list but a giant promo of like, yo, these are the TV shows coming out and stuff like that, and exactly what networks to find them on. So that's why I'm going to pull back on that for now. You'll still have an idea of what I'm watching when you see my reviews go up, which that's a whole conversation we'll get to in a bit. But I feel like if you're looking for a review, typically, at least my understanding would be like, hey, you're looking for this review, you're actively looking for this review, and you happen to stumble across mine. That's why I feel like it's usually like a thing of you watch it saying and you just want to hear someone talk about it after the fact. So that's where I kind of, even though reviews can technically fall into like promo category, like I said, we'll talk about that in a second. It feels like my watch list more than anything is an extremely like promo heavy thing in itself. So that's why I feel the need of like not doing that. So like I said, you'll still have an idea of what I'm watching, you know, based on like some of the reviews, but you won't probably know everything I'm watching, and I think that's kind of like the point. That's what I'm saying. Like, it kind of gets into this blurry line because they don't want you to promote anything, but there has been no conversation. I mean, they've expressly said like, oh, you don't need to like strike again, like in the regards of like consumers should still watch things. So that has kind of been a debate on whether or not it's kind of a good thing to watch things, because like, is that going to work more towards the studio's favor, or is that going to work more towards the actors and the writers who are striking favor? So that's a whole conversation in itself. But like I said, so at the very least, I want to stand in solidarity, because that's where I stand. I stand with the actors, I stand with the writers, wanting proper compensation. That yes, the model on how which they like made their money, how they made a living has changed, and now things need to change and adapt with it. And so, you know, I think they are right to strike and get what they are. Oh, which that's going to be a conversation we're going to touch on a little bit more later on. But continuing on the route of in conversation of my reviews, I am continuing to do my reviews. I'm going to continue doing them. But even this is still kind of something that could be in flux, because I've debated about this. It's crossed my mind for the past like 2 or so weeks. Because initially, I never even thought about like what the strike might mean in the context of what I do. Because the conversation mainly involves influencers and critics and journalists, which I am none. I'm not a critic. I'm not a journalist. I guess technically fall in the influencer category, but I don't think I'm an influence either. I'm just a schmuck on the internet who's on this very, very, very small corner of the internet just talking about the things that I like. That's how I view myself. And so I guess in some lanes I cross over into those 3 categories, but I'm not really either. So it's weird because I feel like calling myself a critic is very wrong, and calling myself a journalist or I'm none of those things, and I feel like it's disingenuous to consider myself any one of those things, and it'd be wrong to kind of label myself as one of those things. So that's where I'm in that interesting spot. But it's like, right, you could still review stuff, and that's where like, but they also say like don't promote stuff, even if it's like you're being paid to do it, or even just because you're a fan of something, which that's what I do this for, because I talk about stuff because I'm a fan of it. I talk about stuff that I like. I just want to get my thoughts out there. I want to share my perspective on things, you know, kind of recap, discuss, and theorize. Like, that's the main bulk of like what I do in my reviews. So that's the complicated thing. And so that's why I've kind of debated back and forth. I've heard discussions from other people kind of in this similar space of what I do, more so like I'm doing what they do type of situation, because there have been so many people who've come before me. I've only been doing the like TV show review stuff for since February of like 2016, so I've been doing this 6 years now. But that's kind of beside the point. The whole situation of the right way to go about things and, you know, standing in solidarity, everyone's had their different perspectives on it. A lot of people are pivoting their content because they don't want to do reactions or reviews to like movies or TV shows, specifically of properties belonging to, or movies or TV shows, things that are under the umbrella of companies that are being struck. So some people are continuing what they're doing, other people haven't. Like I said, have pivoted, and I've kind of been torn between what I should do, because even if I don't do like TV shows and stuff right now, if I didn't like keep uploading them, I would still do them. I just wouldn't be uploading them. I'd just be stockpiling them until it was time to release them after post, you know, the strike. So there's that whole conversation. But if I had to pivot my content, I could go like, you know, a little more video game heavy and anime heavy, but even then I'd have to make sure I'm doing stuff that is not under, you know, the stand in solidarity in that regard. If I moved away from movies and TV show reviews, which I don't really do many movie reviews regardless, but I would more so pick animes that are like kind of being like produced or made that aren't under like kind of in that same struck studio type of situation. So that's where I'm kind of like, I will continue doing my reviews for now, unless I, you know, it's like I said, it's something I'm probably still going to continue to debate. And like I said, it's something that's in flux, not just for me, but other people as well. But it is a conversation of like I said earlier, my reviews, I feel like, right, my reviews are just like, you already watched this thing, so you're coming just to hear my thoughts about it, and maybe you'll agree and maybe you'll disagree. So it doesn't seem as much promo, but the conversation is, and other people reiterated this too, anything could be promo, because there are going to be situations of, oh wow, you're reviewing this thing, I didn't know this thing was out. So it can definitely still fall in a promo category. I've just never viewed my reviews as that, but you know, it still can be and still is. So like I said, it's a situation that's in flux. This is what I'm feeling right now, and I just kind of wanted to share with you how I'm feeling and kind of my thought process. And so I'm saying this now, and maybe like in the next day, because I'll probably end up uploading this tomorrow. How I'm feeling today might be a little bit different than tomorrow versus like how I'll feel the day after, so on and so forth. So just know that this is kind of running through my mind, and I'm trying to figure things out. And I'd really love to get to know your input on it, how you'd feel about it. Now kind of moving into the SAG-AFTRA and WGA of it all. As I was kind of saying earlier, I am someone who stands and I want to stand in solidarity with them. Obviously, like if you're kind of unaware about everything, I'll include links in the description down below so that you can like donate if you feel need to. And if you're not able to financially do that, I think that's okay too. But just kind of any links to any information about what the actors want, what the writers want, and kind of where they stand currently with the studio. I'll link to some articles that kind of really have broken stuff down, and you know, and I'll probably try to keep that as up to date as possible with this video. So I'll probably come back every so often, and I'll probably keep older articles and then tell you about some updated articles about where things currently stand type of situation. At least I'll try to do that. Just do keep that in mind. If there's some older information, that's why. I do believe that the like I brought up before, the business model of how people made money when it came to actors and when it came to writers, the whole residual conversation, the model has changed because of streaming. So I do understand and side with the writers and the actors in this fight, especially when it's that stuff, you know, the residuals and pay, and then the whole conversation about AI. I think the bigger conversation is like, right, AI should be a tool, but it shouldn't be something that is the main thing. That tool, like, it isn't something that should be replacing actors or writers. It should be something that can maybe like be used to maybe simplify certain areas, but it's like, because the thing is, it's not something that's going to go away. And then there's also people also making the argument like, what is kind of AI now isn't even really AI. It's not AI in its truest form, but it is something. It is a technology that's constantly advancing, and so it is a thing of no, especially where the studios currently stands, that's not something that's ever going to go away. Like, that's not going to be a completely like, oh, let's ban that. And I'm not fully sure, and that's why I'm like also ignorant on the subject too, that I don't think the actors and writers are kind of being like, let's completely get rid of AI. They recognize that, but it's more so of we don't want it used in a capacity of replacing us, which is obviously a scary thing that's not just affecting actors and writers. It's been something that's happened to a lot of work and jobs around the world. So it isn't just a SAG and WGA issue. It is kind of like a human issue, like a career and job issue all across the board. Like I said, it should be used as a tool. It shouldn't be the crux of replacing somebody, but it should be like kind of almost like an added thing that you use, like, you know, like, oh, this will help in this capacity, and you kind of use it in the right way, if you know what I'm saying. So generally speaking, across the board, I've seen mainly like a lot of support, but to be fair, that's kind of in my own bubble of the internet, that there's been a lot of support behind the WGA, and then also the actors striking as well. But I've stepped outside of my bubble, and I do see the other side of things where people are like, well, why should I care about? For one, I know a lot of people have their issues with Hollywood, what it represents, the Hollywood elite and elitism type of situation, which it's like, oh, like actors and writers, why would I care about these rich people? Which people will tell you statistically, like, you're talking about a small minority of actors and writers are the, like, unless it's the big names, you know, are the ones that are like, who make the big bucks. We're talking about the majority of these guilds who don't, you know. Obviously there's a statistic that goes around, it's like 86 or 87% of SAG's members can't even make enough money to afford the $26,000 a year you need to get health insurance. I don't know if that's even I think that's specifically SAG. I don't even know if that falls under the category of the WGA. So there's that situation where, like, I think a lot of people have that mentality of like, oh, if you're in Hollywood, you're made it, you're rich and stuff like that. It's like, no, there are people who are working multiple jobs. There are people that I follow that I know they're in that category of like, oh, there are people I follow and watch who are actors, who are writers, but who are also podcasters and who are a host and who are kind of doing the journalism thing and critic thing as well. So, like, you know, like, once again, someone kind of put it beautifully. I was watching today, was like, back then with the 2007, 2008 strike with the writers, and even all the strikes in the past, like, there are similarities, sure, but it's a different beast because, for one, social media is a different thing, streaming is a thing, but also a lot of these people aren't just one faceted thing of like, oh, I'm an actor or I'm a writer. There's so many hyphens behind what someone is. Like, there's so many people who are multifaceted in what they do across the spectrum of like what their jobs are and stuff like that. So, but once again, like, not every writer and actor is the big dogs, and this isn't even just about the big dogs. I mean, I think everyone should rightfully get paid what they're owed, but this isn't even just about the big dogs in this game. We're talking about the people who are in the middle, the people who are in the bottom, and I think that kind of gets lost because I think people have this mentality of like, they hate the Hollywood system and what it represents. It's like, oh, you're shoveling this thing that I disagree with down my throat. It's like, oh, you call me this and that, and I feel like that you have your issues with the way certain people treat you and the certain way the Hollywood system kind of may have alienated people because of their political beliefs or ideologies and so on and so forth, and they kind of like lump the entire system into that because it's like, right, you're part of this system that doesn't like me, so why should I like you? Why should I support you? Why should I care about you? And I get someone not caring about the Hollywood system, but I think it does matter on the person basis. It is a thing of, there are people, it's like, this is their job and they're not being treated properly, they're not being compensated properly, and I can understand other people being like, I work this particular job and I'm not being paid right, and I think other people will make the argument, well, you should be in the same situation where you should be able to unionize and get a better pay as well because, you know, you put in this work and you're not being rightfully compensated, that your bosses aren't, they're kind of using you and not properly compensating you for it. So it's like, right, this conversation, as I was bringing up before, even with the AI of it all too, it isn't just a SAG-AFTRA conversation. It isn't just a WGA conversation. It is a conversation that a lot of unions across the board are having, and the same thing about being properly compensated as well. There's also this side of the internet that it's a situation where I completely disagree. I understand why they have this mentality, but I completely disagree. Is why should writers and actors or whatever get paid when they put out terrible things? It's like, oh, movies and TV shows have been garbage. They've been shoveling certain political things down my throat, which I think, like, well, to be fair, everything's been political. And there's always going to be some messaging and meaning put into something. I get it, like, you don't want it shoveled down your throat, but it's also like any writer or anyone, whether it's an actor, a musician, or everyone, anyone who's, I feel like, artistic in any regard is always going to have their own meanings put into it. So it's not like it's just new, but it feels like recently is when there's been a lot of pushback against that specifically about the political leanings, about the ideology leanings and stuff like that. So, but it's also going back before that conversation of, oh, this was badly written, so why should you get paid? Like, yeah, the good writers deserve to get paid, but the bad writers, they should basically fade into oblivion. And some people are looking at this as, oh, this will be a little bit of a calling that maybe, all the writer, because there was a whole conversation about the producer that's like, oh, we'll starve these people out of their house and homes until they'll take whatever deal we want, essentially. And there's some people being like, good, that now only the cream of the crop will rise to the surface, which I think is a very, like, wrong way to view things. And who am I to tell someone how they should view things? That's wrong on my part, but I feel like you're looking at things from a narrow point of view. At least that's my opinion, and I feel like you're not looking at a multifaceted thing that it should be. There's this whole conversation of like, oh, the TV movies have been bad. It's like, entertainment, especially when it comes to movies and TV shows, is so subjective, because something like, there's no like 100% unified thing. I believe it's not a thing of like, okay, everyone loves this thing and everyone hates this thing. It's a lot more of a gray area in some capacity, because yes, even like a majority of people could love this thing, but there will be people who, oh, I didn't love it, I liked it, and there are going to be people who like, I didn't love it or like it, I hated it. But when there's things of like, oh, this was terrible, this was horrible, I hated it, but then it's like, well, I didn't really love it. I had issues with it, but it was fine. And then there's also going to be people like, oh, this thing that people really hate it, I loved. Like, that's why I'm like, it's so subjective. Like, just because you hated something doesn't mean someone else did. And it's that mentality that, just because you made something that was kind of relegated as bad or not good, that you don't deserve the pay. Like, I think that's not, I don't agree with that mentality. At least, because there's so much more to it. There's a lot more nuance to it, because it's like, for one, is that fully what the final product you get isn't always where it started, because hey, this thing could have started one way and then other people got their hands on it and transformed it into something else that it wasn't initially, So to me, I think that's something that should be considered as well, because there's been so many things that kind of get, because it's like, right, because it isn't just like, oh, this writer made this thing and it's going to be a true adaptation. It's like, no, stuff gets changed along the ways, just because either the writer's like, hey, I want to do things a little bit different, or maybe the director wants to change things up, or maybe producers or the studios want things added or taken out. So I think a lot of that should be consider, that it isn't just like, oh, this movie's bad. It's just, oh, it's all on the right. I believe that there's a little bit more nuance and complications to that. And because I would also kind of say in that same vein of like, you're like, oh, movies have been like, all these writers, this and that, but it's like, I would say look and pay attention of like, are you sure that like that this writer that you say is a bad writer, you're like, oh, they've never made a single thing you've liked? If you feel that way, sure, but I'm sure there's some writers that you're like, oh, I didn't like this thing that they wrote, but it's like, if you look, maybe they wrote something else you did, and I think that could be a true testament of, or maybe it was just this particular project didn't work out, and maybe this one did, because there's certain things that kind of to be said, same thing in the same vein of actors, of like, oh, this actor is bad. It's like, yeah, but some people are like, oh, they were good in this thing, but they were bad in this, and it's like, maybe if they stayed more in this realm, they can hit a very certain pocket where their talent comes through. Like I said, it's such a subjective thing, and just to kind of draw your line in the sand and just be like, yeah, like, why should writers get paid anymore as a group? When there's terrible writing like this, and there's the whole thing of like examples of, oh, this was in a TV show, or this, like I said, it's just, entertainment is such a subjective thing, and to just kind of talk about it in such facts, it to me is such a fallacy of just like, oh, this is objectively bad. Like, maybe you can state it, but it's, to me, like, there's no objectivity when it comes to stuff. It is just subjective. Art in itself is subjective. So that's how I'm feeling about it, and you might completely disagree with me, and that's okay. This is just my viewpoint on the whole situation. So that's why I'm just like, I don't like that mentality of just kind of like, oh yeah, like the bad writers will go away, and just like, you shouldn't be paid for something that, like, you know, you did a bad job on this and that, and writing in general has been this way, and listing all shows that had terrible writing and stuff like that. And someone else had made an argument like, even if you're like, oh, things have been bad recently or whatever, it's like, yeah, but there have been bad TV shows in the past, things that people would consider bad that still lived on for a very long time and were very successful despite being bad. So I think that's a whole argument, you know, that could be, you know, made in itself. So it is still the thing of, regardless of how you feel about, you know, someone's work in, like, as like a writer or an actor, it's like they still did their job. You could subjectively like, oh, they didn't do a good job, but I think it's like, if they still did their job, they put in the hours, they still put in the time, and even if you feel like you didn't like the project, they still did their job, and they should be rightfully compensated, because that's a larger conversation back to the whole residuals of it all, of like, hey, because the whole conversation is like, oh, if you want to get better work, then go work somewhere else that you'll be properly compensated. It's like, well, that's really hard, considering like so much falls under a lot of these major studios, and you know, it's like, oh, you're telling her to go to this other studio, which is also having the same issues as this other studio, because this studio isn't compensating people, and neither is this one, or this one, or this one, is this one. So that's where I think that's kind of another thing that I think is kind of wrong, at least my perspective on it. But back to the point of, if something is a huge success or whatever, we just want to be properly compensated since residuals aren't what they were, and it is a thing of like, right, residuals have been something that has been able to tide over so many people in between different jobs that they're trying to get, and then also it's actually helped so many people sustain like a healthy enough livelihood by living off of residuals and stuff like that. And once again, it's like, that's not something that really exists in a very heavily streamed era. And if there's a successful show, like, we should at least get a slice of that pie as people who help make that thing into what it is. Yes, producers, whatever, they have their roles to play, but you wouldn't have it without the people the directors or the actors who perform in it, or the writers who crafted the thing that is so well received and beloved and touted. So that's why I'm like, if this thing is a success, we should get a slice of that pie, which obviously would involve revealing numbers, and there's been theories about why none of the studios want to do that, whether that's like the stock market reasons of, we don't really want to let people know, like, it's more about the numbers of subscribers we get versus the actual numbers of the shows and stuff like that, which, you know, obviously there's guesstimations about numbers about shows and stuff like that have kind of been out there. Like I said, I just think this is a situation where, feel how you want to feel about it, and like I said, these are just my feelings about it, but I do think that everyone in this situation, like I said, SAG-AFTRA, or whether it's the WGA, and I think this could also extend to a conversation that I've heard, you know, a prominent place to kind of hear those conversations about all of this really would be like Kevin Smith and Marc Bernardin on Fatman Beyond, because they are people who are inside this situation, and they can give you their perspective on it. And there's a lot of videos you can find online, there's a lot of articles you can find online talking about this whole situation. But Marc had brought up a conversation I'd never really heard anyone talk about, and that is like the animated side of things, where like, because the animators and like the animation writers don't fall under the same like situation as like all, was it IATSE, I think is what the group is called. I think animators and animated writers are kind of under that regard, and they don't have the same benefits of like this strike, but maybe this could help them in the long run, because that group doesn't have the pull and power that the SAG-AFTRA and the WGA have. So that has kind of been a prominent conversation that's kind of been brought into the fold as well. And I think there have been some updates about how they have been handling the situation, that they are trying to gain traction and gain power in the long run. I like I said, this is my understanding of a lot of stuff. I could be wrong. Do correct me in the comments down below if there's anything I've gotten wrong, because I do want to put stuff out there that is factual. Also, like I said, telling my beliefs. Like, yes, I may be naive, and this is me being so naive. My naivete and my idealism coming out like that makes me just probably seem like an idealistic idiot or whatever. But like I said, that's where I'm coming from. This is how I'm feeling, and I just, you know, like I said, I hadn't really talked about it much. Like I said, I touched a little bit on the WGA, but I hadn't really talked too much, on this channel about the SAG-AFTRA stuff. So I wanted to be able to talk about that in the WGA in a more extended form. So obviously, like I said, these are just kind of my thoughts. I'd love to get to know yours in the comments down below. But I think for now, that's really all I wanted to talk about. There'll probably be more talk on this discussion in the future. So until then, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.